Imagine living in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood where the biggest drama is usually someone forgetting to bring their trash cans in on time. Everything runs smoothly, until one person decides the rules don't apply to them. This is the story of that one person. Someone who didn't just bend the rules, but snapped them in half, right before karma came knocking. Let's rewind a bit. This neighborhood was run by a homeowners association, or HOA. If you've ever lived in a place with an HOA, you probably already know the type. They can be helpful, sure, keeping things clean, organized, and enforcing rules so everyone can enjoy the community. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone takes things way too far. In this case, that someone was a woman the neighbors had nicknamed Karen. You know the type. Always watching, always complaining, and always making sure you were following the rules, even if she wasn't. Karen had a reputation. She'd walk around the neighborhood with a little notepad, writing down license plates of cars parked an inch too far from the curb. If your grass was too long, expect a letter. If your holiday decorations were up a day past the deadline, she'd knock on your door herself. It got to the point where people were afraid to have guests over, just in case Karen decided their cars were blocking the sidewalk. Most people just tried to stay out of her way. After all, dealing with her was like arguing with a brick wall. She always had some HOA rule to throw back at you, whether it made sense or not. But then one day, something happened that would shake the whole neighborhood. It started like any normal afternoon. Kids playing in yards, neighbors chatting, sprinklers humming away. Then, out of nowhere, the wail of sirens pierced the calm. A fire had broken out on the far side of the street. Within minutes, thick black smoke was curling into the sky. People rushed outside, pointing, panicking, trying to see where it was coming from. It didn't take long before the fire trucks came speeding into the neighborhood, lights flashing, horns blaring. Time was everything. But as the first truck turned the corner onto Karen Street, it came to a dead stop. Parked sideways across the road, blocking the lane, was Karen's car. Firefighters jumped out, looking for someone to move it. Neighbors started yelling, "It's Karen's car. She's always parked like that." One of the firefighters ran to her door, banging on it, trying to get her attention. And when Karen finally opened the door, what happened next had the entire block in disbelief. She refused to move it. She stood there, arms crossed, insisting she had every right to park where she was. The firefighter explained the urgency, but she wasn't having it. She actually told them they could go around. Never mind that their asterisk was asterisk no way around. Never mind that someone's home was on fire. Her car wasn't moving. Not until she was done making her point. Every second ticked by like a lifetime. And as the fire truck sat there, helpless, flames were climbing higher just a few houses down. But the most shocking part? That fire wasn't just spreading toward the neighbor's property. It was moving toward hers too. And that's when everything changed. Neighbors who had been dealing with her nonsense for years could only watch in stunned silence as the flames started licking at her backyard fence. The same person who had tattled on people for their garden gnomes was now realizing that her obsession with rules, and being right, was about to cost her something real. No one could believe it. People had warned her for months that parking in that spot was dangerous. They had told the HOA. They had even brought it up in meetings. But she always brushed them off, saying things like, "I know the rules better than anyone." Turns out, the fire didn't care about the rules. And the firefighters. They eventually had to work around her car anyway, wasting valuable time. Neighbors helped where they could, pulling hoses, moving pets, trying to do anything while the professionals were delayed. And Karen. She just stood there, stunned. It was one of those moments that didn't need any dramatic music or speeches. Reality did the talking. To really understand how things got to that point, you need to know what life was like in that neighborhood before the fire. It was the kind of place where people waved to each other on morning walks, where kids rode bikes till sunset, and weekend barbecues were a regular thing. But ever since Karen moved in, the vibe had changed. At first, she just seemed overly involved. Some neighbors actually appreciated her attention to detail. She was always on top of things, sending reminders, organizing HOA meetings, even volunteering to help with rule enforcement. But it didn't take long for that helpfulness to turn into something else entirely. Karen became the unofficial neighborhood watchdog. But instead of keeping things safe or tidy, she used her position to micromanage everything. People couldn't park in their own driveways if their bumpers stuck out too far. Lawns had to be exactly cut to regulation height. One family got a fine for hanging a beach towel on their porch railing to dry. What made it worse was her attitude. She didn't just enforce the rules, she enforced her asterisk version of the rules. The HOA had guidelines, sure, but Karen had asterisk opinion star. And she expected everyone to follow them, even if they weren't in the official handbook. She had this way of twisting things to make herself look like the victim. If someone politely asked her to stop taking pictures of their house, she'd complain about being harassed. If a car was parked too close to her curb, she'd report it, even if it was just for a few minutes. People tried reasoning with her, but it never worked. Logic didn't matter, only control. And when it came to that specific fire lane in front of her house, it had been an issue long before the fire. It wasn't marked clearly, which gave Karen just enough room to argue that it wasn't technically illegal to park there. But the rest of the neighborhood knew better. They had seen fire trucks, ambulances, and utility vehicles struggle to squeeze through that narrow section of road. Several neighbors had politely asked her not to park there, reminding her that it was an emergency access point. But Karen didn't see it that way. She insisted the road was public, and as long as she wasn't violating a specific code, she was within her rights. She even went as far as calling the city once to challenge a warning notice she received from the fire department. When the city sided with the firefighters and asked her to avoid parking there in the future, she still refused. To her, the fire lane was just another battle in her war for control. She treated it like a personal driveway. No matter how many warnings she got, she parked there daily. Every morning, there it was, her car, sideways across the lane, blocking half the road. And every day, the tension in the neighborhood grew just a little more. One neighbor even caught her on video yelling at a mail carrier for parking his truck too close to her property. That same week, she got into a shouting match with a teenage boy who had parked a dirt bike in front of his own house. Somehow, Karen found a problem with everything, and everyone. It wasn't just annoying. It was exhausting. And while people joked about it online, posting memes and sharing stories in private group chats, there was a serious side too. People started worrying. What would happen if someone needed an ambulance and couldn't get through? What if a fire broke out and trucks couldn't make it in time? These weren't just what-if questions anymore. They were real concerns. Even the HOA board, who once supported Karen for her dedication, began to distance themselves. They had gotten too many complaints, too many emails. But dealing with her was tricky. She knew the bylaws inside and out and wasn't afraid to threaten legal action if she didn't get her way. So for a long time, nothing changed. And then, on that one afternoon, everything came crashing down. The neighborhood's worst fear came true in the most ironic way possible. A fire broke out. The trucks showed up. And Karen, still clinging to her sense of power, still trying to prove a point, refused to move her car. The same woman who had fined people for wind chimes being too loud was now standing in the way of professionals trying to save lives and homes. And she didn't even seem to realize the danger. As smoke began to darken the sky, the urgency grew by the second. Firefighters moved quickly, trying to drag heavy hoses around Karen's car, working against time and against a growing blaze. Every move was harder than it needed to be. They had trained for chaos, but not for someone deliberately making their job harder. The fire was no longer just a distant threat. It had spread from a single home to nearby yards. Fences caught first, then trees. Ash floated through the air like snow. The neighborhood, usually so quiet, was now filled with shouting, barking dogs, crying kids, and the loud crackle of fire. Neighbors were running in every direction. Some grabbed hoses. Others helped families get their pets and children out. But all eyes kept drifting back to the same spot, Karen's house. She stood there frozen. The woman who never backed down in a neighborhood meeting, who handed out rule violations like Halloween candy, now looked like she couldn't believe what was happening. Her arms were still crossed, but her expression had changed. There was fear in her eyes. Confusion too. Like she never imagined that the fire could actually reach her. But it did. The wind shifted just slightly, and within minutes, the fire turned toward her property. Her wooden fence went up fast. Dry bushes near her porch were next. People started yelling again, this time at her, to move her car, to get out, to do something star. But she didn't. She just stared. It was one of those moments where reality hits hard and fast. The firefighters didn't wait. They had to act. One of them got into her car, found the keys still inside, and pushed it out of the way. Finally, the trucks were able to move through. But they had lost time. Precious minutes. While the crews worked, neighbors stood by, helping however they could. Some carried buckets of water. Others checked on elderly residents. A group of teens ran door to door, making sure everyone had gotten out safely. This was a community that, despite everything, pulled together when it really mattered. Except Karen. She stayed outside her house, standing in disbelief as smoke started pouring from her windows. Her voice finally came back, but instead of apologies or asking for help, she began yelling. Not at the fire. Not at herself. But at the firefighters. She demanded to know why they hadn't stopped the flames sooner. Why they didn't do more to protect her home. The same people she had blocked. The same people she refused to cooperate with. It was as if she still couldn't connect the dots. Still couldn't understand that her actions had played a role in all of this. People looked at her, not with anger, but with something closer to shock. Like they couldn't believe even now, in the middle of a disaster, she was still blaming others. One neighbor, a man who had lived on the street for more than 20 years, quietly said, "She finally got what she gave out." No one responded, but a few heads nodded. As the fire crews fought to control the flames, it became clear that several homes had been damaged. But thanks to their effort, and the help of fast-acting residents, the worst was avoided. No lives were lost. A few people were treated for smoke inhalation, but everyone made it out. Still, the damage was done. The once pristine row of houses was now marked by blackened roofs, scorched lawns, and the lingering smell of burnt wood. The clean sidewalks Karen once policed so strictly were covered in soot and debris. People tried not to look as her home continued to burn, but curiosity and disbelief made it impossible. Some took photos, not out of malice, but because they knew no one would believe this story without proof. Others just stood silently, remembering all the times they'd warned her. All the times they'd said, "What if something bad happens?" Now, it had. And Karen, who had spent years enforcing rules that made her unpopular, now stood in the middle of a scene she had helped create, powerless for the first time. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was quieter than usual. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, and charred pieces of wood and debris were scattered across lawns. Everyone was shaken. Not just because of the fire, but because of how it had all gone down. What people had feared for so long had actually happened, and the person at the center of it all was still trying to act like none of it was her fault. The neighborhood group chat, once filled with recipe swaps and lost cat alerts, turned into a flood of messages. People shared what they saw. Some posted videos they had taken during the chaos. One clip, taken by a teenager from their upstairs window, showed the fire truck stuck behind Karen's car, unable to pass. Another clip caught her arguing with the firefighters. No one edited anything. The footage spoke for itself. Within a day, the story made its way to Reddit. It hit the Entitled People subreddit, and from there, it went viral. Thousands of comments poured in from people around the world. Most were a mix of disbelief and frustration. Some couldn't believe anyone would ever block a fire truck. Others said it was a textbook case of karma doing its job. Neighbors started seeing their own stories shared in the comment threads. "This sounds just like my old HOA," one person wrote. "We had a woman like this too, nearly got someone hurt because she cared more about rules than common sense." As the online attention grew, so did the pressure in the neighborhood. Karen's actions weren't just a local issue anymore. Everyone was talking about it, especially because it was her house that got damaged. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But instead of apologizing, Karen doubled down. She started emailing the HOA board, accusing them of failing to properly mark the fire lane, even though she had fought against doing exactly that just months before. She sent long, angry messages accusing neighbors of spreading lies, even though video evidence clearly showed what had happened. She even tried to file a complaint against the firefighter who moved her car, claiming he had violated her personal property. The board, which had once turned a blind eye to her complaints just to avoid conflict, finally had enough. They released a statement to the community, distancing themselves from her and confirming that emergency vehicle access would now be marked with clear signage and painted curbs. They also said they were reviewing the HOA rules and how they handled enforcement. For once, the board was listening to the rest of the neighborhood, not just Karen. And the community responded. Neighbors began organizing a meeting, not just to talk about what had happened, but to plan for the future. They wanted to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. People who had never spoken much before were now exchanging phone numbers, checking in on each other, offering help to those whose homes had been damaged. There was a real sense of togetherness, something that had been missing for a long time. But Karen stayed quiet. At least in person. Online, she was still active. Posting in forums, trying to explain her side, trying to paint herself as the victim. She claimed the firefighters were reckless. She said the fire could have been contained sooner if people had listened to her. But her words didn't get much sympathy. Most people saw right through it. The truth was, the more she tried to defend herself, the more isolated she became. She had spent years pushing people away, and now, when she finally needed support, no one came to her defense. Not because they were cruel, but because they were tired. Tired of the constant drama. Tired of the complaints. Tired of someone who treated a peaceful community like her personal kingdom. And while the fire was a tragedy for many, it also became a turning point. A moment that forced everyone to look at how things were being run, and who they were letting make the rules. Neighbors talked openly now, on sidewalks, in driveways, even at that newly organized meeting. And the one topic that kept coming up wasn't the fire itself. It was the choice to block that truck. That single moment. One stubborn decision. The kind of choice that changes everything, not just for one person, but for an entire neighborhood. As word of the fire continued to spread, more people from outside the neighborhood started paying attention. Local news stations picked up the story, spinning it with headlines like HOA resident blocks fire truck, then her own house catches fire. Reporters came by with cameras, trying to get interviews with neighbors. Most people declined, not because they didn't have something to say, but because they didn't want more drama. Karen, however, didn't mind the attention. She was seen talking to a local news crew on her porch, her scorched house standing behind her like a dramatic movie backdrop. She told them she felt targeted, that she had done nothing wrong, and that she was only following neighborhood policy. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted nervously, especially when the reporter asked if she felt responsible for delaying the fire response. She didn't answer the question directly. She just said, "The rules exist for a reason." And that was her line. Over and over again. But for the people who lived nearby, who had warned her, argued with her, even begged her not to park where she did, those words didn't mean anything anymore. A few days after the fire, someone placed a small sign on the now clearly marked fire lane. It said, "This space saves lives. Not for personal convenience." Nobody admitted to putting it there, but nobody removed it either. Even the HOA left it untouched. Karen, on the other hand, didn't take it well. She called the board, again. This time complaining about unauthorized signage. She claimed the sign made her feel harassed. But no one on the board rushed to back her up. Not anymore. Not after the fire. Not after all the emails, the videos, the damage. The tone had changed. Neighbors who once stayed silent to avoid conflict were now openly sharing their stories. One man said Karen had reported him for having unauthorized flower pots by his front door. Another woman revealed that Karen had sent her 3 warning letters in 1 week, one for a parked car, one for a garden hose left uncoiled, and one for a small Halloween decoration that Karen claimed was a safety hazard. These stories weren't shocking to anyone who lived there. But now, with everything out in the open, people felt like they could finally breathe. The fear of being singled out, of being targeted for petty rule violations, was fading. Something else happened too. A neighbor who worked as a contractor offered to help repair some of the homes that were damaged in the fire, free of charge. Another neighbor organized a fundraiser for one of the elderly couples who had lost most of their belongings. People donated money, clothes, furniture. It was the kind of community spirit that had always been there, just buried under layers of tension. As for Karen, her house didn't completely burn down, but it was damaged enough that she had to move out temporarily. Word got around that she was staying with a relative in another town while repairs were made. Some said she was planning to come back. Others weren't so sure. The neighborhood didn't talk much about what would happen if she did return. But there was a quiet understanding. Things wouldn't be the same. The fire had left scars, some visible, others not. You could still see the black marks on fences, the melted siding on a few houses. But more than that, people remembered how helpless it felt to watch a truck full of trained professionals sit idle while flames climbed higher, all because of one car parked in the wrong place. That memory didn't fade easily. And for some, it became a symbol. A reminder of what happens when someone lets their pride get in the way of simple, human decency. When a need to be right overshadows the need to do what's safe, or kind, or just plain reasonable. The fire changed things. But it wasn't just about flames or destruction. It was about a community that woke up. A group of people who realized they didn't have to be silent. That standing by while someone else controlled everything wasn't working. And sometimes, it takes one dramatic event to bring that truth into focus. The aftermath of the fire left more than just burned wood and charred fences. It left a community wrestling with something deeper. It wasn't just about property damage or blocked roads anymore. It was about trust, respect, and how a few stubborn choices can ripple out in ways nobody expects. In the days and weeks after the fire, people started opening up in ways they hadn't before. Neighbors who had been wary of conflict began sharing stories over cups of coffee or during evening walks. The quiet tension that Karen had brought into the neighborhood was slowly giving way to conversations about how things needed to change. Some people talked about the HOA, questioning how much power it should really have. Others wondered aloud how someone could get so wrapped up in rules that they forgot basic common sense. There were no easy answers, but one thing was clear: this incident had exposed cracks in the foundation of the community. At the same time, many residents found themselves thinking about forgiveness and second chances. After all, Karen was still a neighbor, and despite everything, she was part of their street. Some wondered if she could change, if the fire might have been a wake-up call for her too. But change is never easy. Some people held on to their frustration, still hurt by the years of unnecessary stress and petty complaints. Others wanted to find a way to move forward without letting anger define the neighborhood. It was a complicated balance. What helped was the shared experience of coming together when it mattered most. During the fire, despite Karen's stubbornness, neighbors had stepped up. They had helped evacuate pets and kids, offered water and blankets, and worked side by side with firefighters. That sense of teamwork wasn't new, it had always been there, but it felt stronger now. Community meetings became more open and honest. People spoke without fear of being shut down. Ideas were tossed around about better communication, clearer rules, and more respect for each other's boundaries. The HOA agreed to hold workshops about emergency preparedness, emphasizing that safety had to come before everything else. One surprising outcome was how the fire changed the younger generation's view of the neighborhood. Teens and kids who had grown up feeling trapped by Karen's constant policing now saw neighbors stepping up to support each other. Some even started their own social groups, organizing cleanups and small events to bring people together without the stress of rules looming over them. Even local businesses got involved. A nearby hardware store donated supplies for home repairs, and a local cafe hosted a fundraiser for families affected by the fire. It was like the neighborhood was healing, not just physically, but emotionally. Still, Karen's absence was felt. While some residents hoped she would come back with a new outlook, others worried that if she returned unchanged, old tensions might flare up again. The HOA began discussing new policies to prevent one person from holding so much sway or causing so much disruption in the future. And through it all, the story of that fire, and the blocked fire truck, became a cautionary tale. It was shared not just within the neighborhood but online, in forums and social media groups, as a real-life example of what happens when entitlement meets stubbornness. People debated and discussed it endlessly. Some sympathized with Karen, saying maybe she was overwhelmed or misunderstood. Others saw it as a clear lesson about the importance of cooperation and community responsibility. But no matter the perspective, one thing was undeniable: it had sparked change. The neighborhood wasn't perfect now. There were still challenges, and not every problem had been solved overnight. But there was a renewed sense of purpose. A feeling that they could build something better, together. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just about a car blocking a fire truck, or a house catching fire, but about how a group of people, pushed to their limits, found a way to come back stronger, to face their problems head-on, to remember that being a good neighbor isn't about rules or control, it's about care, respect, and looking out for one another when it counts most.